All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving into another fascinating book from the Hebrew Bible today. This time, it's the Book of Amos.
Amos. Powerful stuff.
It is. A little unsettling at times, too,
Yeah.
But those are often the texts that speak most strongly, I think, to people of faith today. We're going to unpack some of those core messages, things that really resonate, and hopefully see how they can guide us towards a deeper understanding of what it means to live a life in a way that is pleasing to God.
Yeah, I like that. You think about Amos. He's not a king. He's not a priest. He's a shepherd.
Right.
Out in Tekoa, tending his flocks. And a gatherer of sycamore fruit, the text says, which, wasn't exactly a high-status job back then.
Humble beginnings.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But he's called by God to deliver a message, a powerful message to the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And honestly, it speaks to us today just as much as it did back then.
Definitely. And it's all about the timing, too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Amos is prophesying during a period of, relative peace and prosperity. On the surface, things seem pretty good, but...
Always a but, isn't there?
Right.
Beneath that shiny surface, there's this undercurrent of social injustice, corruption, a real straying from God's path. And to understand Amos's message, you have to understand that context. It's like, it's like a doctor giving you a tough diagnosis. It's not because they want to scare you, but because they care about your well-being.
That's a good analogy. So let's get into it. We've got a lot to unpack. There are three key themes that really jumped out at me. God's justice, His mercy, and what it actually means to worship Him.
Big topics. Let's start with divine judgment. I mean, that's what Amos is known for, right? Those pronouncements of punishment. But it's not just some random, you messed up, now you're going to get it kind of thing.
Right. It's not about God being vengeful or capricious. What really struck me is how specific the transgressions are that Amos calls out. And they're all rooted in moral failings.
Absolutely. Look at the nations he condemns. You've got Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, and it's not for random reasons. It's for brutal acts of war, for exploiting the vulnerable, for breaking covenants.
Can you remind us what those are, those covenants?
Oh, sure. They're solemn agreements with God. Promises to uphold his laws, to live righteously. Think of it like a sacred contract. So when these nations break their covenant, they're breaking their promises to God, turning away from his path.
Which flips the script on how people often thought about God's judgment. It's not just about saying the right prayers or going through the motions. It's about what you do, your actions in the world. You could even say that it's kind of a radical idea for the time.
It really is, and it challenges us today, too. Are we living in a way that actually aligns with our faith? Are our actions reflecting those values we say we hold dear? And it's that idea of actions and values that really brings us to Israel's own transgressions. Amos doesn't hold back when he starts talking about his own people.
Yeah. It's tough love, right? Speaking out of concern, a deep love for his people. He wants them to, to return to God, to live righteously.
Exactly. And it's interesting, isn't it, how Amos really focuses on those sins happening within Israel itself, even more than the transgressions of other nations.
It's like, hey, before you go pointing fingers, look in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Calling out hypocrisy, the corruption, deep social injustice.
And this is all happening, remember, during a time of prosperity. It's not like they're lacking resources. They're just, hoarding them, exploiting the vulnerable, turning away from those in need.
Amos describes it in such stark terms. Amos chapter 2, verse 6. They sell the righteous for silver and the poor for a pair of shoes.
Wow. For a pair of shoes. That really gets to you.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, it's like saying human life is worth less than a new pair of shoes.
Heartbreaking. It speaks to a deeper problem, doesn't it? A real hardening of the heart that allows that kind of cruelty to just flourish.
Which brings us to Amos's critique of their religious practices.
Right.
He's always emphasizing this difference between true worship and, I guess, what you might call empty rituals.
Right, because they're going through the motions, sacrifices, feasts, hymns, but their hearts are far from God.
There's that powerful line, Amos 5.21, where God says, I despise your feast days, and I will not smell in your solemn assemblies.
Wow. Strong words. God's basically saying, I don't care about your empty rituals. I want you to live justly, compassionately.
So it's not about abandoning religious expression altogether, right? It's about making sure your actions line up with those beliefs.
Absolutely. It's not outward appearances, true worship. It's about genuine transformation of the heart. that leads to a changed life. And for Amos, that changed life has to include a commitment to social justice.
Right. Even as Amos condemns all these injustices, there's still this thread of hope.
Yeah.
God is still calling them to repentance, offering a chance to turn things around. He doesn't want to punish. He wants them to come back.
Like a parent, disciplining a child out of love, hoping it'll lead to growth, to change. God is a loving God, and he wants what's best for his people.
Okay, so how do we go from awareness to action? It can feel overwhelming, right? Where do you even begin to apply these teachings today?
That is the question, isn't it? Maybe we start by looking at the areas where Amos's critique might still apply. What are we tolerating? What injustices are we even, perpetuating? And what are those empty rituals we might be clinging to, while ignoring the real needs around us?
And what about the systems? Things that, that keep this injustice going. Can we even make a difference when the problem seems so huge?
It's easy to feel powerless. But Amos reminds us that even small acts, of justice, of compassion, they can have a ripple effect. Like a pebble in a pond, those ripples spread outward, touching everything.
It's that ripple effect. That's what gives me hope, We've talked about the problem, about that deep-rooted injustice that Amos condemns, but this book doesn't just leave us there in that darkness. It points towards a solution.
Exactly, a call to action. And remember, this call isn't just to individuals. Amos is talking to a whole nation, a community. He wants to see systemic change, a real transformation of the structures that perpetuate this injustice.
So how do we even begin to apply that to our lives today?
Right.
What does that even look like? Actually doing something about these huge issues.
Well, it starts with awareness. We have to educate ourselves about the injustices happening right here, right now in our own communities. What systems are working against the poor, the vulnerable? Where are people being denied their basic human rights?
Okay, but seeing it isn't enough, is it?
No, absolutely not. We have to get involved. And what that looks like, well, it'll be different for everyone, right? But it could be supporting organizations that are fighting poverty or advocating for policy changes.
Could you give some examples? What kind of organizations are you thinking of?
Sure. So many groups doing incredible work. You've got the Equal Justice Initiative, fighting mass incarceration, racial and economic injustice. Or Bread for the World, working to end hunger, advocating for those policies that promote food security.
So we can connect with these organizations, donate our time, our resources, or even just, spread the word about the work they're doing.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about it with your friends, family, sharing what you've learned, raising awareness, having those tough conversations, planting those seeds that could lead to real change.
That's like Amos himself, right? Standing up to those religious leaders, the political elite, even when it was dangerous, speaking truth to power.
That's right. We're all called to be prophets in our own way, to speak out against injustice, demand change, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unpopular.
And sometimes that means challenging our own beliefs, our own biases. It's not always easy to look in the mirror, confront our own role in systems of oppression.
That's true. It's about personal transformation, being willing to examine our own hearts, root out prejudice and cultivate compassion. It's a lifelong journey, but a journey worth taking.
What struck me about Amos, is how much he emphasizes personal responsibility. He talks about these huge systemic changes, but he also calls for individual repentance, individual transformation. He's saying each of us, each one of us, has a role to play in creating a more just world.
Exactly. And it's not about, earning God's favor, avoiding punishment. It's about aligning our lives with what God truly values: justice, compassion, humility, a real desire to do the right thing.
So if you had to sum up Amos's message, what would you say?
I think it would be this: act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, Micah. But it captures the essence of Amos perfectly, don't you think? It's a call to live a life that's deeply spiritual, but also deeply engaged with the world around us.
It's a challenge, for sure, but also an incredible invitation to work with God, to create a world where justice flows like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Beautifully said. And remember, we don't have to do this alone. We have each other, our communities, countless others working toward that same vision: a more just, more compassionate world.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Book of Amos. We hope you've come away with a sense of hope, a call to action, and a deeper understanding of what it means to live a life of faith, one that's truly aligned with God's heart.
It's been a pleasure exploring this incredible book with you. May we all go forward with renewed purpose, a commitment to making a difference, one act of justice, one act of compassion at a time.